Yes, Miss Richards.
Good morning, sir. This week the spotlight is on Treloar's, Lord Mayor Treloar's School and College, which, as is well known to all those attending here, was the boarding school for children with physical disabilities, attended by significant numbers of boys with haemophilia in the 1970s and 1980s. And a school which uniquely in the country had its own haemophilia centre, located, as at a date in the 1970s, actually at the school. The majority of those children are, as is now well known, now dead. Some of those who survive attend today. In the course of this week, we will be looking at what we can learn about Treloar's from the documents and from the written statements the inquiry has received. We will hear directly during the course of the week from 6 surviving pupils, and we have, of course, already heard powerful oral testimony from pupils at earlier hearings. We will, I hope, be hearing from the parent of 2 boys, both attending Treloar's, both infected with HIV, both dead. And on Thursday, we will hear from the former headmaster, Mr. Macpherson. We won't, unfortunately, be able to hear from any of the key clinicians who provided treatment to the boys at the school. Dr. Rainsford, Dr. Arblaster, Dr. Aronstem, Dr. Wassef, all of them are now dead. And so we will have to try and piece together from the documents and from the memories of those who attended as much as we can about what happened at the school. Over the course of the week, through looking at the documents and through the oral testimony, we will be exploring in particular the following issues and themes. The approach to treatment, what blood products were used and how and in what quantities, and what, if any, steps were taken to reduce or minimise the boys' exposure to multiple donors. And that's an issue that we'll start to look at this morning. What, if any, information was provided to parents or to the children about any of the risks associated with the use of blood products? And the overwhelming thrust of the evidence you will read and hear will be to the effect that little, or more commonly no, such information was provided. What was or ought to have been known about those risks at all material times by the clinicians working in the centre at Treloar's? How and when children or their parents were told that they had been infected with HIV and or hepatitis? And then research, and that will be a major theme which we'll look at later in the week by reference to a range of documents, the extent to which research was being undertaken at the school and whether that was in part a driver for the treatment and approach to treatment that was administered at the school. What I'm going to do this morning, however, is start with an overview of the school, the centre, the facilities, and in the course of the morning we'll show a documentary, or part of a documentary. It was one made in the late 70s called 70 Years On, and so it doesn't deal with the horrific, the tragic consequences of what we now know happened. It's a moment in time which looks at the ethos of the school, the facilities, the services, and so on. But to give you, sir, an idea of the school as at that point in time. There's a later documentary, Blood Brothers, which we will also be showing in full in the course of this week. And then there's a limited snapshot of Dr. Aronstem, 3 or 4 minutes of video footage, talking in, I think, 1987 about the issue of compensation. And again, we'll show that in the course of the week. So starting then with an overview of the school. The Lord Mayor Treloar Cripples Hospital, as it was first called, was the brainchild of Sir William Treloar, a Lord Mayor of London. And it opened in September 1908, with the first boys entering the school in October 1908. At that time, the facilities essentially comprised 2 blocks of wooden buildings. The hospital part of the buildings passed into the control of the Ministry of Health in the late 1940s, while the college remained independent and became known as Lord Mayor Treloar College. In 1953, the school located to Froyle. And if we look at our first document, Shomik, TREL 40517, please. This is a thesis from Dr. Aronstem, submitted as part of a master's degree, entitled Bleeding Episodes in Severely Affected Adolescent Haemophiliacs and Their Management with Replacement Therapy. We'll come back to this document in the course of the week. But for present purposes, if we go to page 89, please, Shomik. We can see a little bit of the history given here by Dr. Aronstem under the heading The Independent College. It says, when the hospital passed into the control of the Ministry of Health in 1947, the college remained independent under the control of the trustees and was then known as the Lord Mayor Treloar College. It remained for 6 more years in its original buildings in the hospital grounds, and then in 1953 moved from the old wooden buildings at Alton to new premises in nearby Froyle. The first term at Froyle began with 44 boys, 1 for each full year of the college's previous existence. By 1954, there were 61 boys in the college new buildings, which had been planned to accommodate another 7 boys, were opened in 1956. And then we see this. The new larger intake in September of that year included for the first time 3 haemophiliac children. So boys with haemophilia attending Treloar's in small numbers to start with from 1956 onwards. There are documents which describe the facilities at Froyle as excellent, a swimming pool, a games room, spacious outdoor facilities, and the documentary that we'll look at will capture some of that. We can take that down, thank you, Shomik. A school for girls was built at Hollybourne, the Florence Treloar School for Girls. That opened in the mid-1960s, and the 2 schools merged to become co-educational in 1978. And at that point, we understand the upper school was based at Hollybourne, called the Lord Mayor Treloar College, the lower school at Froyle, referred to as the Lord Mayor Treloar School, both operated through the Treloar Trust. And again, we can see a description of that from HSOC 0022908, please, Shomik. This is a Hemophilia Society bulletin from 1981, so it's later in time. But if we go to page 4, we can see an article beginning at the bottom of the middle column by Sister Turk, who was the haemophilia sister, or nursing sister, at Lord Mayor Treloar College. And I'll just read a little of what she says about the school's history and establishment. The role of the special school for haemophiliacs has always been a controversial subject, even more so since the widespread practice of home therapy, which has enabled many haemophiliacs to attend local schools with reduced loss of school attendances. Nevertheless, there are still many more haemophiliacs who have, for a variety of reasons, been deprived of a normal schooling. Treloar College provides medical and educational facilities for handicapped children, including haemophiliacs. And I am here to tell you of the work done at the college and how this affects the haemophiliacs in our care. Lord Mayor Treloar College was the brainchild of William Purdy Treloar, Lord Mayor of London at the turn of the century. He was appalled at the suffering of the crippled children in the poor areas of the city and used his influence to launch a national appeal to provide medical care and educational facilities for these children. He bought a disused hospital at Alton, a small farming town in rural Hampshire, which had been built for the soldiers returning from the Boer War, and thus the first hospital school in the country was opened in 1904, so a slightly different date given there. When the NHS was formed in 1948, the college became a registered charity and moved to its present site, and the original hospital school became known as Lord Mayor Treloar Hospital, now the Regional Orthopaedic Centre for Wessex. The college then provided boarding school education for physically handicapped boys from the age of 14. In 1950, so again we have slightly different dates in different documents, but I don't think it matters for present purposes, a sister school was built nearby on the outskirts of the town for similarly affected girls. And then she goes on to say, over the years, the types of handicaps have changed. Initially, the most crippling disease was tuberculosis and then poliomyelitis. In 1970, boys suffering from haemophilia were admitted to the college. Again, that's not entirely accurate, but we'll look at what information we have about numbers. And Treloar Hemophilia Centre was formed at the school, principally to serve the needs of the college, but also to provide facilities in the area for outpatients. And then she goes on, if we go down the page, to describe how the girls' and boys' schools amalgamated into two co-educational establishments of junior and senior schools, and describes there being 300 children in the two schools, of which at the present number of haemophiliacs was 42. There were, we understand, and no doubt those former pupils who we hear from this week will be able to give us their own recollections, but there were, we understand, a number of boarding houses. We have a witness statement from Mr. Scott, who was a housemaster from 1981 onwards, and he describes a junior house for those aged 7 to 11, and then 3 houses for students ages 11 to 16. His recollection was that pupils were allocated to the boarding house on the basis of age rather than as a result of having a particular disability. He describes there being dormitories for between 2 and 4 pupils in each boarding house, and his recollection was that meals were eaten in the boarding house. He says that pupils with haemophilia were in boarding houses with others with different disabilities, but that the pupils with haemophilia moved to the college site at the end of school year 9 at the age of 14, rather than the age of 16 when other students moved up, because that was where the Hemophilia Centre was located. So that's Mr. Scott's recollection, joining the school as a housemaster in 1981. The boarding house each had a housemaster, later called a care manager, and Mr. Scott describes this as a role, a pastoral role with some basic care elements. The care staff in turn were supported by physiotherapists, occupational therapists, speech therapists and medical staff. Mr. Macpherson, the headmaster from whom we'll be hearing later in the week, has estimated that about 40 qualified nurses and 30 therapists delivering different types of therapy, physiotherapy, speech therapy, occupational therapy, were employed at the school and college, managed by Dr. Patricia Tomlinson, who was the college medical officer from 1978 to 1994. Again, if we go to some documents just to flesh out some of the earlier facts about Treloar's and the admission of boys with haemophilia, go first to HSOC 00-22843, please, Shomik. So this is a Hemophilia Society publication from July of 1964. And if we go to the second page, we can see the heading there, Lord Mayor Treloar College. Many members will be aware of the Lord Mayor Treloar College for physically handicapped boys, situated near Alton, Hampshire. Boys are admitted from the age of 11. Just pausing there, we'll see from other documents boys being admitted from the age of 9 at a later stage. Application usually being made by their local education authority, and they must be considered capable of following a normal routine and of deriving benefit from one of the courses provided. From the age of 16, training courses are provided leading up to, for instance, the technical examinations of the City and Guilds of London Institute or the diploma of the Faculty of Secretaries. The college enlists the aid of youth employment workers and Ministry of Labour disablement resettlement officers when the time comes for the boys to find suitable employment. At the invitation of the warden, Mr. Hayward, 4 members of the committee, accompanied by Dr. Catherine Dormandy, later of the Hospital for Sick Children, Great Ormond Street, and of course subsequently a significant figure at the Royal Free, and who is known to many members, recently visited the college. They were given a most interesting insight into its work and activities. Of a total of 130 boys, there are at present 26 haemophiliacs attending the college, this being the second largest group of boys suffering from the same disability. Pausing there, sir, we see that from the first 3 boys admitted in 1956, by 1964 the numbers have grown to 26 boys with haemophilia. The party was shown the various classrooms, workshops, dormitories, sick bay, dining room, and indeed all the most impressive buildings and grounds of the college. The excellent facilities available include a fully equipped swimming pool, games rooms, and spacious grounds allowing for the pursuit of outdoor activities. Acquaintance was renewed with some of the haemophiliac boys who came to the Christmas party last December. the specialist treatment haemophiliacs sometimes require does, in relation to the present accommodation in Alton, impose a restriction upon the numbers accepted by the college, but a close liaison is maintained with the local hospitals and also the haemophilia specialists at Oxford. And at this point in time in 1964, there was not yet a centre at the school, a haemophilia centre at the school, but we'll chart the establishment of the centre in due course. If we go back to Dr. Aronstem's thesis, TREL 40517, please, Shomek. And we go to page 90. We can see, if we pick it up towards the bottom half of the page, reference about 6 or 7 lines down from what we see on the screen to by about 1971 or so, the number of boys with haemophilia at the college had reached 40. And then in the last paragraph, over the next 5 years, the number of haemophiliacs at the college increased to over 50. And you'll see there the reference to, by 1977, 2,000 transfusions being given annually. If we look also at NHBT 0107241, please, Shomek. We can just turn it round. This is a report from, this one is authored by Dr. Rainsford in January 1975. I'll come back to different aspects of it when we look at research later in the week. But for present purposes, if we turn to page 6, please. We can see at the top of the page the figures being given for the number of children with haemophilia attending the school in summer and autumn of 1974. So we have a total of 52 in the summer of 1974, 53 in the autumn of 1974. The largest number recorded there is suffering from haemophilia. Understand that to be a reference to haemophilia A. So 42 boys, summer of 74, 39 in the autumn of 74. Haemophilia with inhibitors, 5 boys. Christmas disease, so haemophilia B, 4 in the summer of 74, numbers increased to 8 in the autumn of 1974, and then you'll see there the reference to miscellaneous, 1 pupil there identified. So a total of 52 and then 53 boys at the school. In terms of the arrangements for admission to the school, the documents that we've seen, and indeed the written statements that we've seen, suggest that a child's local education authority usually made the formal application on a pupil's behalf for admission to the school and thereafter paid the fees. There is evidence that some pupils' placement was jointly funded between the local education authority and the local social services department. A very small number of pupils were placed there and funded there by their parents. However, in relation to the boys with haemophilia, there is ample evidence to demonstrate the significant role often played in arranging admission to the school and indeed in being kept informed of ongoing treatment by the home haemophilia clinician. In other words, usually the director or other doctor at the haemophilia centre where the boy was registered close to their home. And we can see some examples of that both in contemporaneous documents and in witness statements. If we go first of all, please, to TREL 40336_037. So we can see this is a letter dated the 6th of February 1979 from the Children's Hospital in Birmingham. It's from Dr. Frank Hill, addressed to Dr. Aronstem. And if we pick it up in the bottom half of the page, we can see it says, his mother manages most of his bleeds conservatively at home, and for the most part she copes very well with him. It does, however, mean that she devotes most of her life to looking after him and has become increasingly overprotective to try and spare him as many bleeds as possible. For his part, he is a very cheerful boy who complains very rarely. Because of repeated bleeds, he's been unable to attend school on a regular basis for some time and has a home tutor on a few half days of the week. He's been trying to go to school for an afternoon per week to do some science, and I've suggested they should try to increase his school attendance. Unfortunately, this has not been possible because when he goes to school, he inevitably slips over and has a further blood. I think that should be further bleed. He asked when I saw him at my clinic fairly recently if there was any possibility for him going to Lord Mayor Treloar's school. I discussed this with his mother, and she also said it might be the answer for him because he would probably get a higher standard of education and there would be someone near at hand to cope with his haemophilia problems. I think that he would most certainly benefit from the educational point of view and from the social aspects as well. I think he would enjoy being with other boys who also have haemophilia and would not feel quite so alone with his dilemma. Is there any possibility that you would be able to take him? So there's one example of the approach to Treloar's, in this case directly to Dr. Aronstem, being initiated by the haemophilia clinician for the home centre, in that instance Dr. Hill. A second example is at TREL 5011_029. This is from Dr. Mibisham at King's, 25th of May 1978, and this is addressed to the headmaster at Treloar's. You were kind enough to advise me recently by telephone when I inquired about how to apply for this haemophilic lad to be enrolled at your school. I've taken all the necessary steps and am enclosing a copy of the form SE2 for your interim information. The other main form, SE3, has been separately completed and forwarded to the Inner London Education Authority, ILEA. I should like to thank you for your courtesy and cautious pessimism about his chances of being processed and considered at this late stage from 1978-9. I deeply regret that delay in satisfying myself fully about his complete suitability for enrolment may have prejudiced his chances of acceptance. And then further information is given by Dr. Mibisham about the particular patient. And if we pick it up in towards the bottom of the page, we see in a few lines up from the bottom, I feel he would be good value as a member of the Lord Mayor Treloar community, and I trust ILEA will sanction his application and that it arrives in time to be considered. I should be glad to provide other information, especially medical, should you or your medical colleagues wish it. So we can see there the doctor, the home treating clinician, taking an active role in trying to arrange the placement of a boy at Treloar's. And then third contemporaneous example, TREL 40308_043. So this is a letter from Dr. Evans at the Manchester Children's Hospital, July of 1978. Now this is addressed not to Treloar's but to the local education authority, so to the senior educational psychologist Middleton, and it refers to, in the first paragraph, to two boys with severe classic haemophilia who have been patients of mine for many years. There's then a description of the circumstances in terms of the haemophilia of the two boys. If we go to the bottom of the page, we pick it up in the last 5 or 6 lines. In changing to a secondary school, the boys will have to travel further and mix in a larger and less sheltered environment. They will not be as easily able to go if they've had a recent bleed. They are both capable of going to a normal school as their problems are mainly intermittent, but the school needs to be physically suitable. For instance, they will need to be able to get about on crutches or in a wheelchair from time to time. Smaller schools where the staff can make sure the children are not being knocked over in the rush, or different classrooms. The journey to school should not be too long or too tiring. And then Dr. Evans sets out his opinion that there's no secondary school in the local area. And he says in the last sentence of that paragraph, consequently, after discussions with the family, I have come to the conclusion that their needs are best met by education at a boarding school. And then if we go to the next paragraph, unfortunately there is no suitable boarding school nearby. In their case, haemophilia raises problems which can only be met in a school with suitable facilities. In this country there are 2 such schools, and the best facilities by far are available at the Lord Mayor Treloar College at Alton in Hampshire. This school has a haemophilia centre on site. We'll learn shortly that is effectively from 1978 onwards, with medical and nursing staff experienced in the management of the acute and long-term problems of the disease. Such facilities are available nowhere else in the country. Although there are other boys under my care with the disease in normal and special schools, both residential and day schools, none presents quite the same combination of problems as these 2 brothers, and I consider that no other school is really suitable for them. And then Dr. Evans indicates that for one of them, we are forced to make a decision now about his education, as the Lord Mayor Treloar College is the only school which can provide the comprehensive facilities he needs. We'll have to make the same decision about the other brother in 2 years' time. It's preferable for both boys to be together as they can help each other. I understand from the headmaster at Treloar that there may now be no vacant places for this September unless a child already accepted drops out. If this is so, I should prefer one of the boys to transfer to another residential school rather than go to a local day school. As a short-term arrangement, the children's convalescent home and school at West Kirby might be suitable. So there again we can see the involvement of the home treating haemophilia clinician, here engaging, has clearly already engaged with the headmaster at Treloar's to explore the question of whether there are vacancies, but here writing to the local education authority with a view to trying to arrange for placement at the school. And that's consistent with the witness testimony which the inquiry has received. Again, I'll just give some examples. If we go to WITN 3044001, and we go to the 3rd page, top 2 paragraphs. I went to Treloar's College just before the age of 11, commencing in September 1979. My parents were simple Welsh Valley people who held the medical standard and doctors in very high esteem and trusted their word. They never would have questioned their advice. They were very stoic. I was a bright child and my parents had tried to get me into a school in Bristol, but this was deemed not suitable. Professor Bloom had conversations with my mother and Treloar's appeared to be a solution. I boarded at Treloar's from 1979 until 1987 when I left aged 18. During my time at Treloar's, I was never consented for treatment and never signed any consent form. So again, we can see both from the documents that we've looked at and from this and from some other statements I'll refer to shortly, that placements at Treloar's were arranged by centres all across the country. It wasn't simply centres near in the vicinity of Hampshire, but from across the country, placements were made at Treloar's with the active involvement of the Home Haemophilia Centre. If we go to WITN 4641001, this is a witness statement from Mrs. Sheila Squires, talking about her late son, Peter. And if we turn to page 5, we can see paragraph 22 here, the involvement of doctors at the Royal Free Hospital. So my husband, along with doctors at the Royal Free Hospital, were keen for Peter to attend the Lord Mayor Treloar College in Hampshire. I did not want Peter to go away from home, but my husband felt that it would make him more independent. I must admit it did do him good, and he made a lot of friends who were naturally all haemophiliacs, and so they had a common bond. Peter's character was tender. He was always willing to help people. I think it was because he went to that school. My husband saw Peter pushing another boy in a wheelchair when he first went down to visit him. So again, you'll see there the reference to the Royal Free, and there are quite a lot of documents which show that Dr. Dormandy in particular had an interest in Treloar's, not least the Hemophilia Society document we've already looked at. And then if we look at WITN 1055001, this is the statement of, or one of the statements of Ms. Carol Grayson, and if we go to the 3rd page, and we look at paragraph 9, here talking about her husband Peter, Peter was a patient of the Newcastle Royal Victoria Infirmary from birth, which had a regional haemophilia centre under Dr. Hamilton and Dr. Jones. He was later treated at a centre in the grounds of Lord Mayor Treloar School, where he was advised to go by his consultant, being a severe haemophiliac. Again, we'll come back to this and some of the other statements in the course of the week, but you'll see there again the reference to the consultant advising admission to Treloar's. Both Peter and his brother also attended the school. And so there's an example of the Newcastle Haemophilia Centre making arrangements, or at least suggesting admission to Treloar's. And then if we go to WITN 3648001, and we go to page 3, this is a witness talking about her late son, and at paragraph 12 we can see saying this: at the Royal Free Hospital, his late son, my apologies. At the Royal Free Hospital, Dr. Catherine Dormandy, the consultant in charge of the Hemophilia Society, treated him. He had missed a lot of school and college due to going to the hospital for treatment, so Dr. Dormandy suggested he attend the Lord Mayor Treloar's College because everything was there. He could study and receive treatment at the same time. And then perhaps just the last example for present purposes, BHCT 301031. This is an inquiry from Dr. Maine in Belfast to Dr. Aronstem, May of 1974. Dear Dr. Aronstem, Dr. John Bridges, who looks after some of the very young children with haemophilia, has asked me to write to you to inquire regarding the educational facilities at Lord Mayor Treloar College. And then if we go to the next paragraph down, there are 2 haemophiliac boys, and she refers there to a particular family, and one age 7, one age 9. Last sentence of that paragraph. My query is, would the college accept these children as pupils? Are they too young? So we'll see, we can take that down, thank you, Shemik. We'll see later in the week as we look at some of the documents relating to individual treatment and blood product usage. We'll see close contact was usually maintained between the centre, the school, and the home centre. And there are many examples of detailed letters being written, for example, by Dr. Aronstem to the treating clinician, explaining what bleeds there have been in a term, what treatment there has been, making suggestions or recommendations for treatment during holidays when the responsibility would again rest with the home haemophilia clinician. What's striking is the absence of any similar or equivalent communications to parents. It's very much a dialogue undertaken both at an early stage, as we've seen from these materials, and then throughout the boys' attendance at the school between the clinicians, with little involvement of parents that we have been able to detect from the documents or indeed from the written statements that we've received. And then if we turn then just to an overview of the centre itself, the Haemophilia Centre. In the 60s and for much of the 1970s, it would appear that haemophilia patients at the school, pupils at the school, would initially attend the school sick bay if they had a bleed. And they would then, if they needed treatment, they would be transported at that point to the Lord Mayor Treloar Hospital at Alton. That's the narrative given by Dr. Aronstem in his thesis. In the late 1960s, in 1968, Dr. Rainsford, whose role we'll come back to in the course of the week, was appointed as a research fellow. And again, the documentary evidence suggests that led to a significant increase in the number of plasma transfusions given to pupils. But again, those transfusions appear to have been given at the Lord Mayor Treloar Hospital. It was then Dr. Rainsford who established a coagulation laboratory for the first time at the Lord Mayor Treloar Hospital. And we can see that if we look at AMRE 5011_051. It's a letter dated the 18th of December 1970, and it's from Dr. Dormandy at the Royal Free. It's addressed to Dr. Guthrie, the Director of the National Fund for Research into Crippling Diseases. And it's a letter being written by Dr. Dormandy in support of an application for a grant made by the National Fund for Research into Crippling Diseases to continue to provide funding at Alton. And again, we may need to come back to this when we look at the role of research and the role of Dr. Rainsford. But we can see here some of the developments in the late 1960s, early 70s. So, dear Dr. Guthrie, thank you for your letter of the 8th of December, with which you enclose a copy of the application from the Lord Mayor Treloar Trust for a continuation of the grant made to them in 1967. During the 2.5 years that there's been a research fellow at Alton, the strides made in establishing a research unit there have been tremendous. As you know, this has had to be done from scratch, and when one considers that there was at first no coagulation laboratory there at all, and that they now have assays going and research products well underway, the progress made has been remarkable. I appreciate that there have so far been no publications, but I ask the committee to bear in mind the fact that when a grant is given to a university or some other place in which a laboratory is already set up, the position is entirely different from the case as it was at Alton, where equipment had to be bought, techniques learnt, and standards set up and prepared. So that's what was done, as we understand it, after the appointment of Dr. Rainsford in 1968 as part of his establishment of the coagulation laboratory. Dr. Rainsford has done an extremely good job, which has not always been particularly easy. This has now been fully recognised by all those who've been involved with his work. In planning his research projects, Dr. Rainsford has inevitably laid the foundations of a special haemophilia unit. The Wessex Regional Hospital Board, which is already financing a research technician, is expected to take over those aspects of this very specialised unit which have been presented to them as routine treatment. Before the appointment of the research fellow, the junior hospital staff were called upon to administer treatment as they saw fit. Frequently, this was very inadequate. Moreover, it was entirely without laboratory control. No sooner had the research fellow set out his protocol for the various regimes than it transpired that the hospital staff were being very hard-pressed to cope with his requirements. Now that the Regional Hospital Board has definitely recognised the tremendous value of doing the job properly, it is more important than ever to continue the appointment of the research fellow, who will now be able to forge ahead with the projects outlined in the research programme which has been submitted to you. I'll come back to other parts of that letter in the course of the week. But you'll see there then, so the development of the coagulation laboratory and that development having in turn consequences in terms of treatment, and it would appear Dr. Rainsford set out protocols for various treatment regimes, the suggestion being that the hospital staff there were finding it difficult to cope with those requirements. In 1972, the Treloar Hemophilia Centre appears to have been established for the first time, based still then at the hospital, under the directorship of Dr. Arblaster. That's what Dr. Aronstem's thesis tells us, and if we go to DHSC 010026_122, we can see some correspondence here from 1971 in relation to the provision of funding. So this is a letter from, I think, somebody within the Department of Health to the Wessex Regional Hospital Board. And if we look at the first two paragraphs, we can see it says, Dr. Rodens has been in correspondence with Dr. it might be Rose, of this department about the establishment of a centre for haemophiliacs in North Hampshire, initially at Treloar Hospital, Alton, and in his letter of the 21st of May requested an additional revenue allocation in support of it. And then we can see the next paragraph reads, I'm now writing to say that the department agrees to provide an additional recurring allocation on revenue account to support this development, and certain figures are then given. And the next paragraph says we should like to have an informal report on the centre at an appropriate time. So the centre established in 1972 with some central funding, some funding that would appear from the Wessex Regional Hospital Board. Dr. R. Blaster was the director, Dr. Aronstem an associate director, and according to Dr. Aronstem's thesis, at the same time a haemophilia ward was established at the hospital. In 1978-79, however, the Hemophilia Centre, and by this time Dr. Aronstem was the director of the centre, he took up that post in 1977, transferred location to now be located at the school. And if we look at HHFT 301066_002, we can see some discussion about that. This is a meeting of the Wessex Regional Health Authority on the 28th of March 1979, and we can see that Dr. Aronstem was in attendance. And then if we look at the heading, discussion of the scope of the proposed regional haemophilia service, its present arrangements and workload and likely future trends, we see this. Dr. Aronstem explained that the Lord Mayor Treloar College has been in existence for 40 to 50 years as a school for physically handicapped children, and that a large proportion of its intake has been haemophiliacs. These haemophiliacs have been transported to the Hemophilia Centre at the Lord Mayor Treloar Hospital to receive treatment as the need arises. The distance between the college and the hospital is about 6 miles, and so there is an undesirable delay before treatment can be administered. Under these present arrangements, those who have to be hospitalised are admitted to beds at the Lord Mayor Treloar Hospital, with sometimes a detrimental effect on their education. With the introduction of co-education in both the Lord Mayor Treloar College and the Florence Treloar School, haemophiliacs live on 2 sites. Treatment is given on a 3rd. The existing Haemophilia Centre, so the centre at the hospital, consists of outpatient and laboratory facilities and general administrative services. A 10-bedded sick bay is sited at the college. Basingstoke District provides an allocation of £22,000 to Lord Mayor Treloar College to cover the cost of 3 part-time nursing staff and medical and surgical equipment. Dr. Aronstem considered, however, that it is impractical for the haemophilia laboratory to be sited 6 miles from the ward. The point was made that there is a local haemophiliac outpatient population numbering about 25. Such patients could not be admitted to the college. They would therefore need to be admitted to Basingstoke General Hospital. And then this. Dr. Aronstem emphasised the necessity for research as the concentration of haemophiliacs found at Treloar's is unique within Britain. There is a necessity for purpose-built treatment areas rather than a converted sick bay, inpatient facilities, a laboratory on site, a secretary and a consultant's office. Dr. Aronstem also spoke to the need for continuous monitoring of the levels of factor VIII given to haemophiliacs in order to compare the relative effectiveness of different dosage levels. He favoured a programme of bodybuilding to strengthen muscles surrounding joints and believed the benefits of intensive prophylaxis and the effectiveness of DDAVP in the treatment of mild haemophilia should be further investigated. During vacations, the children return to their homes. Most outpatients are trained to treat themselves. It's hoped that ultimately all haemophiliacs at the college will be trained to treat themselves. And then if we look over the page, we can see what was being proposed. So top of the next page. The cost of the proposed capital scheme is thought to be of the order of £250,000. HGB, that is, I think, Dr. Badman, who was the chair of the Wessex Regional Health Authority, or the chair of the meeting anyway, spoke to the problem of siting an NHS-funded building on private property. Discussions with the College Trust are essential. A second problem concerns the investment boundary for capital schemes and finding a place in the capital programme. There's provision for £250,000 in 1982-3 in the capital programme. This is linked with the projected closure of Lord Mayor Treloar Hospital. Dr. Aronstem hopes that ultimately every severe haemophiliac adolescent in the country would wish to go to Treloar's because of the quality of the treatment provided. In order to increase the intake of haemophiliacs, there would need to be a reduction in the number of physically handicapped children admitted. Such an admission policy would need to be discussed with the college trust. And then there's a discussion about having a regional representative to establish a link between Dr. Aronstem and the college trust. And so that's the discussion. There's then a reference in relation to factor 8 usage, but I think we can pick that up in other documents more usefully. So that's the position being discussed in March of 1979. If we go back to Dr. Aronstem's thesis, TREL 40517, and go back to page 90, and we pick it up at the bottom of the page. So he refers at the last 4 lines to a haemophilia ward having been established at the hospital shortly after the designation of the centre, and the majority of bleeds were treated there, having first been seen by medical staff at the college. And then in 1977, Dr. Aronstem became director of the centre, and 1 year later, all treatment facilities were transferred to the upper school at Hollybourne. Now, that would suggest 1978, but the document we've looked at would suggest more likely 1979. But in any event, what we then get is a description by Dr. Aronstem as at 1981 of the arrangements as follows. The Hemophilia Centre at present is directed by Dr. Aronstem with 2 full-time medical officers assisting. The Treloar College Upper School sick bay is staffed with 1 sister and 13 part-time nurses. 4 of these are dedicated to the treatment of haemophilia and are competent to transfuse haemophiliacs. Boys with fresh bleeds or those being followed up are seen by medical staff in the sick bay wing. Those needing transfusions either transfuse themselves or are transfused by nursing staff. Those needing bed rest are admitted to the 10-bedded sick bay unit. The haemophilia laboratory and secretarial suite are located at Lord Mayor Treloar Hospital. A laboratory and clinical facilities of a district general hospital are available at Basingstoke. Consultant orthopaedic surgeon, Mr. F.J. Moynihan, sees cases at a joint clinic weekly, and major orthopaedic and bleeding problems may be referred to the Hemophilia Centre and the Nuffield Orthopaedic Centre at Oxford. So that's Dr. Aronstem's description of the facilities as at 1981. You'll recall, said the evidence of Adrian Goodyear, who talked about the centre having an open door policy, and again we'll come back to that in more detail later in the course of the week. We've a statement from Ms. Helen Burton, who was the headmaster's secretary for a long period of time. She's recalled Dr. Wassef, one of the full-time medical officers at the centre, living on site at Hollybourne, close to the centre. Her recollection was Dr. Wassef was mainly based at the centre. Dr. Aronstem worked at the Basingstoke Hospital as well as seeing pupils at the centre. There was also, as I referred to earlier in the course of the morning, a school medical officer, Dr. Patricia Tomlinson. She says in her witness statement she had no involvement with decision-making at the Haemophilia Centre, and medical decisions at the Hemophilia Centre operated independently of the medical decision-making being made by her and her team more generally at the school. And we should just look at her statement, I think, in relation to that. WITN 5578001. So her statement tells us she was medical officer at Lord Mayor Treloar College from 1978 to 1994. If we go to the second page, please, Shomik. We pick it up almost halfway down the page. It says the Treloar Haemophilia Centre was for the treatment of the boys with haemophilia. The Haemophilia Centre was a separate unit on the college site for the treatment and care of boys with haemophilia. It was managed by Dr. Aronstem, consultant haematologist, and Dr. Wassef, assistant to Dr. Aronstem. Dr. Wassef was on call for haemophilia care every day and lived nearby. There was a daycare ward in the haemophilia centre staffed by a ward sister. And then if we go further down the page, bottom of the page, she says, in terms of her own role, I provided GP care for the students of the college when needed. I advised non-medical staff at the college about the students' needs and liaised with other health professionals such as physiotherapists. This role did not change with time. Top of the next page. The majority of my work at the college was providing primary care for students with spina bifida, cerebral palsy, Duchenne's muscular dystrophy, and other life-limiting conditions. I can recall seeing a number of boys in the college with what initially appeared to be glandular fever. I believe that subsequent blood tests showed they might have contracted HIV, but I did not request the tests, and the boys were medically managed by the staff at the Haemophilia Centre. Again, obviously, that's an issue we'll come back to in more detail later in the week. The next paragraph, the Haemophilia Centre treated the haemophilia and associated medical problems. This included blood tests, factor VIII treatment, joint treatments, and as far as I'm aware, management of HIV and hepatitis and related diagnoses. Non-haemophilia care that I provided included other diagnoses that would be commonly seen in a GP surgery. And if we look at the bottom of the page, she says, I had no part in decisions, actions and policies formulated by the Haemophilia Centre regarding the use of blood products. Over the top of the next page, I had no part in decisions regarding particular treatments of pupils' bleeding disorders. I had no part in decisions regarding the approach to prophylactic treatment of pupils with bleeding disorders. Haemophilia was managed by medical staff in the Haemophilia Centre. Next paragraph, I was not involved with the emergency treatment of children with bleeding disorders. The pupils would be sent to the Haemophilia Centre by college staff or attend themselves. Children with bleeding disorders would be treated in the Haemophilia Centre. For more minor ailments that could be managed by a GP, they might have attended the college medical centre. Blood products were only held in the Haemophilia Centre. Generally, as far as I'm aware, all haemophilia care was given at the Haemophilia Centre. And so you'll see the picture there that emerges is of the Haemophilia Centre effectively functioning autonomously without the involvement of the school's general medical centre or Dr. Tomlinson as the school's medical officer. That is largely borne out by the contemporaneous documents. We see multiple documents emanating from Dr. Aronstem, some from Dr. Wassef. We see Dr. Aronstem's attendance at various meetings and so on, and little to suggest any kind of active involvement in that process by the general medical facilities at the school. The statements we have also indicate, sorry, we can take that down, Chairman, that there were dedicated drivers and vehicles for transporting pupils, initially before the centre was located at the school to the hospital, the Lord Mayor Treloar Hospital, and then once the centre was located at the upper school, transport between the lower school and upper school is required, and that accords with the recollection of a number of the witnesses who provided evidence to the inquiry. Just in terms then of the key staff involved with the Haemophilia Centre and some of the names that we will see come up in the documents. We've already seen reference to Dr. Rainsford, a research fellow from the late 1960s who effectively laid the groundwork for the centre to be established. His full title was, his background was military, was Surgeon Rear Admiral Seymour Grome Rainsford. There is a picture of him in the National Portrait Gallery's archives, which has online the standard query, can you tell us any more about this person, or any mistakes in anything we've said about him? And there's one online entry beneath on the National Portrait Gallery's archive in April 2019 from a Peter Kirk, who one assumes is the Dr. Peter Kirk, who worked at the centre in the 1970s. And Peter Kirk has written on this entry in the National Portrait Gallery archive, I worked with him, that is Dr. Rainsford, initially in Her Majesty's Factories Inspectorate, I think in 1964. And then he adds this, he was in charge of blood transfusion for the D-Day landings. And then Mr. Kirk says, I worked with him again in 1972 at Lord Mayor Treloar College. So Dr. Rainsford, his research work, we'll come back to, as I say, later in the course of the week. Dr. Arblaster, I've already mentioned, director of the centre from 1972 to 76 or 77. And then Dr. Aronstem became director of the centre in 1977 and remained in that position until May 1997. Dr. Munir Wassef worked as the senior clinical medical officer at the centre. Not sure exactly when he joined, but there's correspondence from him in October 1978, so he's there by then. And there is the latest documents that the inquiry has found, which refer to him at Treloar's, is from April 2003. Then Dr. Peter Kirk, who I just referred to, worked at the centre certainly from July 1974 to June 1976. If we look at HCDO 40545, we'll see here minutes of the second meeting of the UK Hemophilia Centre Directors Hepatitis Working Party, dated the 14th of March 1978. And if we just look at the first few lines, it refers to Dr. Krask welcoming Dr. Treloar and Dr. Ellis, and then said he'd received a letter from Dr. Peter Kirk resigning from the Working Party. He stated in his letter that he decided not to continue his career in haematology and was looking for an opening in general practice. So we're not entirely sure at present whether Dr. Kirk remained at Treloar's until this point in time and then left, or whether he'd been working elsewhere between 1976 and 1978. Again, we'll come back to Dr. Kirk's name from time to time and his involvement in research in the course of the week. Dr. Kirk is based in Canada and has declined to provide a statement to the inquiry, and we're not in a position to compel him because he is based outside the United Kingdom. There was then Dr. Painter. Dr. Painter worked as a senior clinical medical officer at the Hampshire Area Health Authority and honorary registrar in haemophilia, involved with the centre for a relatively limited period of time between approximately May 1977 and September of 1978. And if we go to WITN 5277001, please, Shomik. This is a statement that Dr. Painter has provided to the inquiry. If we go to page 6, this was his recollection. So if we pick it up in the second paragraph, he says, I was appointed as a senior clinical medical officer by the Hampshire Area Health Authority with honorary registrar appointments in haemophilia and paediatrics, although I had no specific knowledge and no experience of working in either of these disciplines. And then if we go to the bottom half of the page, he was asked to describe, so if we just go up slightly, Shomik. He was asked to describe his work at Treloar's insofar as it involved the care of pupils with bleeding disorders, and he said this: with regards to pupils at the college, this generally meant holding a sick parade each morning to deal with bleeds that had occurred overnight. Once seen and treatment prescribed, the boys would be taken by college transport to Treloar's, where the staff had been alerted by telephone from the college sick bay staff who was coming and what level of factor 8 or 9 rise had been prescribed. So just pausing there, the period of time at which Dr. Painter was there would be when the centre was still based at the hospital before it had relocated to the college premises. He says, I followed the existing regime of prescribing a 20% rise for joint bleeds and 30% for muscle bleeds. I might also go to Treloar's myself to see if I could help setting up some of the infusions. Another sick parade was held late afternoon to assess the effects of treatment. With regards outpatients, i.e. not pupils at the college, I would normally be informed by staff at Treloar's, and again I think he's referring there to the hospital, that a patient had phoned in with a problem and had been asked to report directly to the haemophilia unit. I would then visit, examine the patient and prescribe treatment. And he makes clear that he never ran clinics at Treloar's, so involved for a relatively limited period of time. We also have a statement from Dr. Ashok Roy, who worked as a haematologist at the centre from 1986 to 1990. He was junior to both Dr. Wassef and Dr. Aronstem, and We may look at his statement at a later stage, but he explained his role was to treat and look after bleeds in relation to patients. He didn't have managerial or decision-making responsibility. There is also reference from time to time in the documents to a Dr. McHardy, a medical officer there for part of the 1970s. So what I want to do next is show some parts of a documentary called 70 Years On. It comes in two parts, and what I'm going to suggest is, there are two parts that we want to show. What I'm going to suggest is we show the first part now. It's about 8.5 minutes. That will take us to the break, and then I can show the second part, which is another 10, 15 minutes or so after the break. So, Shomik, could we have MDIA 40140, please? And we'll play it up to 8 minutes 44. Just before we do so, it is a documentary. It's entitled 70 Years On. It's reflecting 70 years from the establishment of Treloar's. So it was made in around 1978, 1979. It's a documentary of its time, made without knowledge of some of what was then to ensue in the first part of the 1980s. And it looks at the broad range of facilities, services available, not just for pupils with haemophilia, but for pupils with a range of other disabilities. But it may assist in giving some idea of the physical layout of the school and some of the facilities that were on offer. So, Shomik, if we could start playing that, please. Shomik, is the volume on? Yeah. Sorry, we're just going to try and sort out the volume. I don't think, yeah, try again. The commentary starts a little bit in, so maybe we just haven't picked it up yet. No, so we're obviously having a problem with the volume. The commentary should have started by now. Perhaps we could take the break now.
Yes,
and we'll sort that out over the break.
let's do that and sort out the technical problems over the break. So we'll take a break and come back at 20 to 12.
Thank you, sir.
So 20 to 12.